Hi, everybody. So for this week, for our data analysis, I chose to look at a test that I just gave to my students, just finished grading this week. And it was our Unit 3 Common Assessment. So it's a district-wide assessment that all students in the 8th grade take. And it was related to informational texts, facts and opinions, argumentative techniques, supporting evidence, topics like that. The reason that I chose this was I kind of pulled some inspiration from our reading for this week in the Mills text in page 199, where he talks about how he's basically using a math test in the example that he's giving on that page. But the last paragraph of that page before the key concepts box is really what stuck out to me. And it was probably because I also had a department meeting today and we were looking at data. But he, in that last paragraph, says, used in conjunction, the mean and standard deviation can provide you and your colleagues with a great deal of information about the data you have collected if you have determined that data is that is data that can be counted. So in our department meeting today, we were really talking about what standards our students are scoring well in, what standards they need to improve in as far as standardized testing goes, and our CDTs and things like that. And informational text is one of those things. So I wanted to look at our common assessment because those standards on our common assessment align with the same standards that we were looking at in our department meeting today. And I figured that this would be a good way to analyze that common assessment, see where my students are at as far as reaching those standards that we talked about in that meeting today. And it worked out that this all aligned well and the timing was good. So I was able to analyze these tests. So like I said, it was our Unit 3 Common Assessment, and it was on informational text and facts and opinions. So the first thing that I did was I took one of my classes. There's 25 students in that class. And the test is broken up into two parts. There's a part with multiple choice, and then there is a writing component, a text-dependent analysis. The entire score is out of 66. So what I did with this first column here is just my students 1 to 25. I did a multiple choice column. So I wanted to know what their score was just on the multiple choice out of 16 questions. Then I did just the writing portion out of 50 points, their total score out of 66, and then their percentage on their test. So this first column, technically the second column, but the first column with actual data in it, the multiple choice out of 16, if we look down at the bottom, the average score was a 12 out of 16, which is 75%. For this class, that's pretty low. And that's kind of what I realized as I was grading the test anyways, that they weren't doing great on the multiple choice. I then looked at the writing section. It makes sense that the majority of the students scored so well on the writing section. The average was a 48.44 out of 50, or almost 97%. And it's because a lot of our focus this year has been on developing TDAs. So they did really, really well on that portion. And then I wanted to see their total score out of 66 and what percent they got on the test. And overall, they did pretty well on the test. The average was, almost a 61 out of 66, so almost a 92%. So they overall did really well. But that multiple choice part is really what stuck out to me. And I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that multiple choice section and see what was going on there. Because, there are some kids who scored like a 6 or an 8 or a 9, and that's low for these kids. I also noticed while I was grading that some of those questions were kind of popping up as multiple kids getting them wrong. So that's where I focused. Because they did well in the writing, I was okay with the score that they received there. But here, I took this chart and I saw that multiple choice was lower than what I would like it to be. So my next step in that then was to create an additional table. And the first column here is the student number corresponding to the test scores from the previous slide. And then columns 2 through 17 are the actual multiple choice question numbers. So like across the top row here, you see 1 through 16. Those are the multiple choice question numbers. And then row 26, which is the very bottom row that begins with the black box, right here, begins with the black box. This row is the number of students who got that question wrong. So what I was able to do here is I went through every single test and I went through each student. So student 1 got questions 3, 7, 9, and 10 wrong on the multiple choice. Student 2, 3, 7, and 15, so on and so forth through all 25 students. And then I went through each question. Only 2 students got question number 1 wrong. So obviously they were comprehending that material. 6 students got question 2 wrong, which is a little bit higher than I would like. Obviously, of course, I want them to get everything correct, but 6 out of 25 still is pretty good. 19 of those kids got that question right. Question 3 and 4, another 6. But then I get to question 5, and I've got 10 of my 25 kids getting it wrong. That starts to stick out to me. Same thing with question number 9. I've got 13 of 25 kids getting that question wrong. That is a big one that I need to be paying attention to. And then again, questions 14 and 15, 9 and 11 students getting those questions wrong. So this table made it really obvious to me, which questions they were getting wrong and which questions they were doing well on. If you look at question number 8 here, every single student got question number 8 correct. So I'm good with that. Questions 1, 6, 8, like I said, 12, 13, and 16, they all did really well on those. So what I did with that then is I kind of decided what do I want to do with this data? What was it for? What did I want to collect it for? So this data showed me that the students performed more successfully on the written portion, the TDA, regarding the techniques that the authors used in the articles to support their arguments. So the TDA prompt asked them to decide what techniques did the author use or authors to support their arguments. They did phenomenally with it. Across all of my classes, they did really, really well. But as I've said throughout this presentation, the data also showed that the students did not perform as well on the multiple choice. So it was necessary for me to see which questions they performed well on and which questions they did not perform as well on. So using that table from this slide here, I was able to come up with this information. Students answered questions accurately regarding supporting details that authors used to develop their arguments. These were questions 1, 6, and 8. Students answer questions accurately regarding identifying claims and oppositions, questions 2, 3, 4, and 7. Students also answered questions accurately regarding active and passive voice, verb usage, verb voice, and shifts in voice, questions 11, 12, 13, and 16. So I know I'm good with that content. They're good with that content. They probably don't need a lot of additional support there. But I did find that students struggled with questions regarding identifying the main idea of an article. That was question 5, which we know 10 students got wrong. Students also struggled with identifying one of the author's positions of her argument. Question 9, this was the big one. 13 students got that one wrong. Students struggled with understanding what both authors agreed on or agreed about, even though their positions differed. Question 10, which was 9 students. And finally, students struggled identifying gerunds and shifts in verb moods, which was questions 14 and 15, 9 and 11 students respectively. So what am I going to do with all of this? So the disaggregation of this data really allowed me to analyze which portion of the test my students performed well on and what sections they struggled with. What I'm planning to do with this information then is identify which concepts they struggled with in the multiple choice so that I know what I need to reteach those students for future success in class and on standardized tests like the PSSAs and the CDTs. So this data, really the way that it was formatted once I got it into that table and those charts, it showed me a completely different perspective than just grading them as a whole and seeing, so-and-so got 60 out of 66, but it's because they got 50 out of 50 on the writing. They still got 6 out of 16 questions wrong. If I'm not looking at it on those tables that way, I may not realize the pattern. I definitely probably wouldn't have realized, 13 of 25 kids, the majority, got this one question wrong, question number 9. So having this data laid out like this made it a lot easier for me to understand what I need to reteach and what I taught well so that I can reflect on, okay, how did I teach that well? How did they understand it? And how can I maybe adopt those same methodologies when I get to the point that I need to start reteaching these materials?